I'm on page 24. Real property versus personal property. Well, as a review, we learned that real property is the land. It's whatever is attached to it that we call improvements. And then it's the bundle of legal rights. And then personal property, we learned we could call it personalty. We could call it chattel. Even in this unit, we could call it trade fixture, couldn't we? That's another personal property. Did you learn another term for personal property in this reading? In Unit 2, there's another word I can think of. Actually, 2 words. How about implement? Why don't you write that down? Implement. I'll spell it. And when we get there, I'll show it to you, but it's a good chance for me to give you this word. Implement is cultivated crops. Cultivated crops like wheat and corn. Cultivated means someone's using their labor, planting it back every year. And harvesting, getting the fruits of the labor, and that's the other terminology called frutus industriale. Frutus industriale is the word for implement, another word, the Latin word, and it means fruits of your labor. And it means cultivated crops like wheat and corn are always good examples. Now I'll show you that when it comes in your reading, but while we're thinking about it, other words for personal property. Typically, this should be kind of black and white. Real property is attached, personal property is not. Personal property is movable, and it goes with you. Now, you can imagine in the real estate business, nothing's really standard. Like I mentioned to you, I believe Monday, even when we speak about the water rights, when you speak to buyers and sellers, you're still going to ask a whole lot of questions. We just can't make assumptions. And so in real estate, fixtures and personal property is a little bit of a big deal. When you go out to look at property, is this going to stay with the house or do you want it to go with you? And so we're not going to make any assumptions. We're going to do a real thorough job and ask those questions. But we're learning basically what is a fixture. And so the bottom of page 24 is your terminology for frutus industriale. And do they have implement there? They sure do, don't they? So frutus industriales, fruits of your labor. And then frutus naturale, which means it grows naturally. Like grass grows naturally, once it's planted. You don't have to replant it every year. Trees grow naturally, bushes grow naturally, and so those would be considered real property. The frutus industriale would be considered personal property, basically. It tells you that if there's a renter, if you've got somebody renting your property and they plant a field of wheat or corn, they will be allowed to come back even after the lease expires to get the fruits of their labor. And that makes sense, doesn't it? If it makes sense, that's pretty straightforward. However, in real estate sales, that's not the case. If you go out to meet an owner of property with the idea they're asking about putting their house on the market for sale, we call that listing the property for the seller. If you walk around their yard and they've got a field of corn, I would ask, or do you want to come back and get your corn when it's ready to be picked? And they might say, I didn't know I could, or they might say, of course, I've got all my work in there. But that would be something that you would have to notate and make sure, because think about it from the other side as a buyer. What if you're looking at that house to buy and you see the wheat or you see the corn? It might not even mean that much to you as a buyer, but the question might be, well, how is that going to be handled? Or you might just assume, I get that because I'm buying this property. But think about it from another angle. If the owner says, I want to come back when this corn ripens, it might be 6 weeks after closing. And the buyer's thinking, so they're gonna be walking around in the yard? When are they coming back? I might have a gate with my fence and we might have dogs in the back. And so, it could stir up some stuff. But you can imagine everything's negotiable. I really don't know that that scenario happens very much where the owner says, I do want to come back. I don't really probably think that happens much. But the whole idea is you as a real estate broker need to have this knowledge and you need to ask. Because I can tell you, sellers and buyers don't have the knowledge we do, and they assume certain things. That owner could assume I'm coming back and not even bring it up because they planted it. They're thinking I'm coming back to get my stuff. A buyer might assume once we buy and we close, they can't come back because that would be called trespassing. So it's just knowledge for a real estate broker. Let's have this conversation, and then I'll make my notes on it and make sure that it's noted in the MLS. On the MLS data sheets, where we submit room sizes and address and how much the house is being offered for sale, there's a section called Agents Remarks. And so agents can look at that and it might say that cornfield, the owner wants to come back and get their corn. And so, it's just one of those things. I would cross my T's and dot my I's and make all my notes. But let's look, if you will, on page 25. They're talking about, well, it's possible to sever, and then there's another word called annexation. We can sever from real property. In other words, they're bringing up the notion of an apple tree, top of page 25. An apple tree, while it's growing, is real property. It's real estate. It's in the ground. The roots are in the ground, aren't they? Guys, that's real estate, or we could call real property, whatever word we want to use. The apples growing on that tree are real estate. But can't they fall off? Can't we pluck the apples? Once they're taken off the tree, what if a farmer is selling bushel baskets of apples? Can't they take them and put them in baskets? That's called severing and taken away, severing away from that tree. And they made those apples in the bushel basket personal property now. The tree growing still is real estate. Annexation, second paragraph, you can make personal property real property. Imagine going to Lowe's or Home Depot, and you're walking down the aisle and you're looking for a ceiling fan. And they've got box after box of ceiling fans. So you put a box, a ceiling fan in your basket, and you scoot it up to the cash register, to the checkout person, and that's personal property, isn't it? Aren't we moving? We're moving it along in the basket. That's personal property. When we get back to our house and that ceiling fan becomes installed, we made that personal property real estate. And that's what a fixture is. A fixture used to be personal property. It became annexed or affixed to the real estate, and now we call it a fixture. Mm-hmm.
So does that work with like same way as you buy a tree, right? And you plant your tree, it becomes
Real estate.
real estate.
The question is, Mahad said, so that same thing goes with a tree, doesn't it? If you are planting trees in your yard, you are attaching them to real property and it becomes real estate too. But everything is negotiable, and as a real estate person, you'll learn as you go. As you're starting out, you're not going to know every question to ask, and a lot of this is on the job training when you're in real estate sales. But for example, I've gone out to list property before. Owner called me and said, I want to put my house on the market. Will you come talk to me about that? And we were walking around the backyard, and this happens a lot, I think. The owner says to me, that little dogwood tree right there by the edge of the deck, I just planted it when my mama died, and I want to dig it up and take it with me. And that's perfectly okay, as long as we know. I'm going to make a note of it. I'm going to put it in agent remarks on MLS, because he wants to sever it, right? And that's okay as long as we know. Now visualize, what if he didn't tell me, or what if I didn't ask? Is there anything even in the yard you want to take? because I want to be real thorough. And what if we don't talk about it and buyer buys the property and loves that little tiny tree, even though it's just planted, does their final walkthrough and the tree's not there? Now you've got a problem. So it's really good to communicate, just even if it feels like silly, down to the fine line, even if it feels silly. And I usually tell new students, new brokers, you know, sometimes you might feel like, oh, that's silly to ask that question. You know, really, it just feels so minute that I'm going to ask. Well, here's what I would say that might make it not feel so silly. Just say if you're feeling a little embarrassed that you got to ask all this stuff, say to the owner, you know what, my broker in charge will just kill me if I don't ask. It's not me, it's my broker in charge. I'm going to write everything down. We have to be so thorough. And don't you think that also might show that you're being very professional and you're the expert in the field? You need to know every single thing. And unfortunately, we're not going to learn all that here, but you will when you get your training and then just by learning as you go. But look with me, if you will, on page 25. So we're talking about fixtures, and if you're thinking about your outline review for your exam, my suggestion would be the reading about fixtures begins on this page. I would say even on 24, real property versus personal. And if you'll just go with me for a minute or two, and I think it goes over to page 28, to be honest with you. In other words, it's more than a paragraph that I would study on fixtures. I would make sure I know the difference between fixtures and personal property. We're going to talk about mobile homes and modulars, and we're going to talk about several things. And so my studying on fixtures is a handful of pages, not just one paragraph. So look with me back on 25, fixtures. It's important for you to distinguish. If you don't know, ask. And it says, look at your third line down, fixtures. Item was once personal property. It's affixed. Affixed means attached or annexed. It's affixed or attached to the land. And the law says it is now part of real estate, but it is called a fixture. Examples, so you can read those. Any example there. Now go to the next, go down a couple of lines, 6th line down in your paragraph, all the way over to the right. Look at this sentence, because I would highlight it if I were you. If an item is a fixture. Well, now the operative word so far is if. If it is, so that means that, do you know if it's a fixture or not? So one thing is it's attached. Trees, bushes, lights, chandeliers, ceiling fans. If it's a fixture, it automatically transfers, goes with the property unless it is excluded from either party to the contract. If it is a fixture, it automatically transfers with the sale unless it's been excluded, and I'm going to add in writing, by either party. Guys, the buyer can say, I don't want that light fixture in this room. It's ugly. Tell the seller to take it out of here. That can be negotiated, can it? So, by either party. Almost any item that's been permanently part of a building is a fixture. So you could argue when the builder starts building, gosh, the screws in the wall, the hinges on the doors, the pulls on the cabinetry, all of that is part of real estate that we're going to call a fixture. Okay?
Would a TV mount count as a fixture?
Hold that thought. Well, yeah, I'm going to show you, if you don't mind. Legal test of a fixture. So this is something that you'll be tested on. This is, everyone within this textbook, this is your level 3 part right here. So level 3 means I probably need to know this inside out. I need to be able to look at a paragraph question and figure out, So a question example would be, according to the sales contract, according to the sales contract, light fixtures, ceiling fans, etc., stay with the property, and the buyer and the seller negotiated, and nothing was said about the chandelier, but the seller, when they moved out, decided to take it with them because it was an heirloom from the grandma, and there's a distraction right there, or you follow me, it's an heirloom from my grandma, doesn't matter, doesn't matter. Cost a whole bunch of money, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Irreplaceable, doesn't matter. And so then they'll send you off on that tangent, and then they'll say, nothing was mentioned in the contract, buyer comes to do the final walkthrough, and that chandelier's not there. Is that chandelier a fixture? And the answer is yes.
What about
So-
curtains or blinds?
Hold that thought. Hold that thought. Everybody with me? All right. Let's look at the legal test. I'm going to answer those two questions, if you don't mind, in just 1 minute. Legal test. Everybody, legal sounds like the law, and it even says, here's what the courts interpret. Here's how the courts look at this. Now, it doesn't mean you can't use these little ways too. You can. And so the courts look at these 4 parts of the test. It's called the total circumstance test. Is this personal property or a fixture? The number 1 most important thing is intention, everybody. It's the main one. Did the person install it intend to make it permanent, or did they intend to remove it? Well, now, here's what I'm going to ask you. How would you know unless you ask? How would you know? Well, let me give you some clues. You'll hear me say throughout the course, this is a red flag, or this is a clue. If you drive up to a property and you drive up, and most of us park on the road instead of in the driveway, because that's a little pet peeve of some people. If you park in the driveway, you block somebody in, and then they got to get out. I'm feeling like Kevin Hart all of a sudden. I don't know if I'm him. But he goes on, and I'm going on and on. I need to stop. Okay. What if you pull up to the property and you see a mailbox in the yard? And the mailbox is painted, and it's got grass and stick people, and and the smiley faces. Guys, that's a clue to me. That looks sort of personalized to me, does it you? I mean, when you drive around and see mailboxes, we all don't have stick people on our mailboxes, do we? And grass and pretty flowers. So it's a clue to me. I'm going to ask, do they want to replace that mailbox? Because it looks like it was personalized. Are you following me? There's a clue. Otherwise, mailboxes belong to the property. And if we don't ask about that, and the seller doesn't say anything, guys, it's my job to say it though. Do you think owners know this stuff? Owners thinking, that's my personalized mailbox, I painted it. So it's our job to ask.
If you don't like it as a buyer, can you make them replace the mailbox
Sure.
since it was altered?
Everything's negotiable. Yeah. Probably they're not going to leave it is my whole point. But the whole thing is, we need to ask about it. We need to make it clear that your mailbox looks like it's been personalized. Do you plan to take it with you? It seems like you would. It's got your little kids on it, like stick figure kids. But it seems like you want to take it. But just remember, you have to put a mailbox back, because that's kind of federal, isn't that a law? You got to have a mailbox receptacle. And so that's a clue. If I go into the property and see something, or it looks ornate to me, now I don't have a clue what's expensive or not, but if it looks ornate, if it looks unusual, chandelier, for example, or if it looks antique, guys, I'm just going to ask, that chandelier looks a little antique, do you want to take it with you? And the owner might say, I didn't know I could. Yes, I do. And then as real estate brokers, we know it's best if you can remove it before buyers see it, because when buyers see, they want what they see. It reminds me when I took my boys when they were little, this is a crazy mama thing that I did, took them to the pet store. But I want it, Mama. No, we're just looking at the pets. But I want it, Mama. And that's the way buyers are. If they see it, they want it, and that's not a bad thing. Your house, you're offering it for sale. We're kind of presuming what's here goes. So best advice, seller, if you are attached to that, why don't we go ahead and box it up? You box it up and put something else there. So when a buyer comes in, they see what they get. So little things you'll start paying attention to as you enter and get more experience in the business. Number 2, the relationship of the annexor. Do you own this property that you attach the ceiling fan to, or are you renting it? Everybody think about that, and a lot of this kind of intertwines. If you are a renter of a house, do you think your intention is to better or to improve that property for the owner? Don't you think if you added a ceiling fan, and by the way, we'll talk about leasing later on, renters aren't supposed to add things without permission, but if they do, don't you think they're probably thinking they want to take it with them? And so if you're showing a property it's somebody's investment property, but someone's renting it, I would pay close attention. You know, does this belong to the renter or does this go with the house? So think about the intention, think about the relationship. I don't own it, so if I put something up, I'm taking it with me. That makes sense, doesn't it? And then how is it annexed? How permanent is it? And the question about brackets on the wall, that's pretty darn permanent. So brackets for TV would be considered a fixture. Does it mean you can't take it with you? But it is a fixture. Does everybody see that? Attached. And then how does it adapt? Does this really work with real estate? Now, you can imagine people attaching, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but shelving, I mean, that could be a fixture too if it's attached, but you can imagine decorative things when people attach certain decorative things in their houses. You might argue, well, I wonder if that's personal property. Well, let me give you an example. And I did feel kind of silly about it, but I had to ask because I didn't want to buy this. I didn't want to buy this. I didn't want to make a mistake where I would have to say, I need to make this right, let me pay for it. I'm not saying you have to, but if you make mistakes, golly, somebody's got to make it right. And so I showed this house, feels silly now, but guys, I was careful. I showed this house and there's this big room, kind of what we call a great room, which is a den living room combination. Walked in and on this one big wall, kind of like my big sign back there. By the way, that was an accident sign. I'm not that vain. Anyway, it was mismeasured and we got it for a good deal. But anyway, walked into this house. There was this big fish hanging on the wall. I guess you'd call it a marlin, one of those big fisherman fish. And I'm looking at it and going, God, I wonder how attached that is. And I wonder if it'll do damage. Now I knew it's personal. You know, doesn't that sound like personal? That's a good example. It's attached, but that looks like it's personal, doesn't it? But then I started thinking about, well, how is it attached? And will it just ruin the wall? Will there be a big old hole in the wall? Now, I didn't think about it, but when we asked, owner walks over here, lifts it up, hanging on a nail, and all the fish stuff's not in it anymore. So it was real light, you know, and I felt silly. But I didn't know about fishes, and I didn't know how heavy that was, and I didn't know, but it was just hanging there. And so, but guys, if you don't know, isn't it better to ask? I'd rather feel a little silly, and then not, rather than not know. But that's a good example. It looked like it was attached, but obviously to me, it's personal. All righty. How does it adapt? Go with me, if you will, to page 26. And we're going to answer Kristin and Mahad's question. Look at the middle of your page. You see in practice. I would like for you to read. It'll take you a minute, but those are that big paragraph, in practice. Page 26. Well, yeah, what,
I have a question.
okay, ask real quick.
So if you, like, say if there's a fixture or something that's like personal and they're pretty much done with the deal. And,
A picture,
Or a fixture. Like
fixture,
Or if there's something like they want, like you said, a family chandelier or something like that. Is it your responsibility that if they say like, hey, we want to bring this with us, do you have to replace that chandelier?
who's you?
You as the real estate agent? Or
No,
is it
you as a
seller?
real estate agent, owner would. Yeah, if the owner, the question is who's responsible, and it may be my fault that he's asking the question like this. Real estate agents don't replace things, but if you make a bad mistake, the buyer and seller's gonna say, you made that mistake because you didn't tell us. And so real estate agents may have to make things right. I'm not saying it happens often, but if you make a bad mistake and you want to make sure the buyer and seller complete the transaction and that they're happy, I mean, the companies, you know, you have to make your mistakes right. But no, this would be up to the seller and buyer. The negotiation is between them. If the seller tells you that they want to replace a chandelier in the dining room, well, seller, if you take it out, there's probably wires hanging down, right? You need to put something back. And that's why it would be better to go ahead and put something back before the buyer sees it. Let me give you an example. What if a buyer comes in to see this property and the chandelier that's there, the seller said they want to take it with them and they'll replace it. They just don't want to take it down yet. And so we have a note, and I'll tell the buyer that chandelier is not going to stay, the seller's going to replace it. And what if that chandelier is obviously expensive? And the buyer can see that it is. And the buyer says, that's okay, but I want it replaced with like kind. I want the same value put back. Now, we've almost defeated the whole point of taking it, right? So seller, if it's any way you can take it and box it up, it's advisable, you know, so that someone doesn't get attached to it because you'll end up negotiating it away, maybe. And so let's go ahead and address it.
How does washer and dryer work?
Did you see washer and dryer in that paragraph? Washer and dryer is personal property. Now, let me just say, everything's negotiable. Buyers and sellers negotiate refrigerators and washer and dryers and curtains sometimes. But curtains wasn't in there, was it?
No, but I see the rods.
Well, the rods are
and the
attached.
shades and the blinds.
They're
So, yes,
attached.
Pull down shades and blinds.
They're
Instead of
attached.
Curtains, no.
I'm not trying to be a smarty aleck, they're attached. So the definition is it's attached, right? And so, now guys, now make sure you're understanding what I'm saying. The definition is it's attached. Didn't we say unless excluded, it's meant to go? So if you're in love with those shades that you might have had made by a drapery person and it cost a lot of money, and maybe it'll fit another window, you can say, I want to take that custom made blind or shade with me. Everything is negotiable and it can be excluded. The whole point is, if you don't exclude it, these are examples of fixtures, maybe not all inclusive examples, but these are examples. The curtains are just slip off on a rod maybe, or hanging on one of those little hooks. So the curtains are not, they're not. But the rods are attached, and the brackets are attached, and the shutters and blinds, they were cut for that window, right? And so that's what that's for. Is everybody understanding? It's called a fixture, but if either party says, I don't want it, we will write it that it's going to be excluded. That's the big thing. That's what makes this so important. And this is probably an area where there's a little, probably this is an area that comes up a lot, where people don't talk about it, and somebody has a misunderstanding, and it needs to be addressed. Real quick, and we're going to move on.
This might be like an off topic, but what if you go to a seller's house and they're like, hey, what if you want this TV for this net price? Is that illegal?
Not illegal, but not contractual unless it's put in writing. So that's something that happens in real estate too. Mahad's saying, what if you're looking at the property and the seller says, hey, I'll leave this, you can pay me for it later. Well, that would be another agreement that an attorney would need to draw up, not you as an agent. They would draw it up. It's called a bill of sale. A bill of sale would just be some kind of documentation if the buyer and seller or negotiating other personal property, because it does not belong in a sales contract. Now, typically in a sales contract, if a buyer says, I want the refrigerator, adding a refrigerator or, typing it in there or typing in washer and dryer is not problematic. But once you start talking about lawn equipment, furniture, pool table, other things like that, it doesn't need to be in the sales price of the real estate. That needs to be on a different document that a lawyer should write up. It's called a bill of sale. And so, but look with me, let's carry on here for a few minutes, because I think that you'll get the drift of this. But everything is negotiable. Hold your place. Remember I told you Monday, if I can show you someplace else in the book where we'll be using this knowledge that's going to be accumulating over time, hold your place and go to page 192. At the top you see this document, it's a contract, is called an exclusive right to sale listing agreement. This is the first contract you'll probably use because most of us go out and try to get listings. We try to get houses that we want to put on the market because then we've got our sign in the yard and then the phone's going to start ringing. It's our inventory, in other words. You're trying to go out and get people to list. This is a contract form that the Realtors Association developed, and so there's a benefit of becoming a realtor. The Forms Committee under the organization has developed forms that most of us like to use, so we don't have to have our own company draw up every single contract that we want. We can all use the same forms, if you will, so that when we are working or co-brokering means I'm listing a property for the seller and another agent wants to make an offer. We're co-brokering, and so if we all are familiar with the same forms, it sure does make it easy. And so most realtors use the realtor forms, and that, if you look down the bottom left, you see the letter R. It's a trademark sign, and this is only for realtors to use. Hugely beneficial, because everything's all written and gone through the Forms Committee, and lawyers look at it, and it's all just nice, and we just fill in the blanks. So if you look at number 3, fixtures and exclusions. Everyone is the listing agent, the person that represents the seller that has the biggest job of discovery. What goes with this house and what doesn't? Because you would be the person who's going to submit that to the multiple listing service. And so you will be the one putting the information that if another agent wants to show the property, they should know what's going to stay or what's going to go. So the paragraph under 3B, guys, it's basically the same language that we just looked at in practice. And so when you go out to meet a seller, you've got it all written here. You don't have to think at the top of your head and memorize. You've got it all written, and you can either read it to the seller or say, seller, glance at this paragraph. If there's anything in there that you think that you don't want to leave with the property, let us know now so we can exclude it in writing, right? And so we would exclude it. So you'll have questions like, do you own it or are you leasing it? You'll have questions like that. Look at number 3, bottom of 192. Look how A is written. Any item which is leased or not owned by the seller, such as fuel tanks, like propane gas. Guys, propane gas tanks are usually leased. And antennas, satellite dishes could be leased. Receivers may be. Appliances, people do rent some things like that. The alarm and security system, that's something to talk about. Could be built-in alarm, but what about the system where it's monitored? Probably that ain't going to go with the sale, because isn't that extra money that you pay probably every month? So those are things you'll talk about. And then it says must be identified here and shall not convey. Highlight that word convey. We're going to see it in Unit 5. Convey means transfer. It does not go with. It does not convey. And then you see the list, and look at top of 193. Letter D, dog. Other items that do not convey. So maybe we'll put here the chandelier. Now, listen to me for a moment. If we wrote in the chandelier does not convey, that's very vague and it's probably not going to hold up. What chandelier? The chandelier in the dining room, over the dining room table, that one right there that's got all them hangy-downy things. That one doesn't stay. Guys, I'm being silly, but you need to be thorough, right? You need to be completely thorough. And I suspect a lot of agents are taking photographs, and having them in the file, making sure you're clear what stays or what doesn't stay. Number 4 would be where you would write in the personal property. So someone asked about the washer and dryer. If the seller says, I'll leave it, because in reality, when we move major appliances, it's not good to move major appliances like that because they don't work as well, they get damaged. But anyway, they're expensive, so most sellers take their stuff with them. But the seller can say, hey, I'm going to leave it. And so if they are, we're going to write it in. You're leaving the washer and dryer. By the way, is it that Kenmore one there, that white one? It opens at the top. Is that the one? I'm going to write down the serial number. Is that the one you're leaving? Because I want to be real thorough. I don't want to buy a washer and dryer because I made a mistake. Are you following me? Okay. And I'm not saying that agents replace this. I'm saying if you make a mistake, somebody's going to come to you, aren't they? All right, now let's go someplace else. Let's go to page 274. So you can let that page go and go to 274. We'll get, this will be things we'll talk about as we get here, but this is the offer to purchase and contract. This is our standard contract form that was referenced in Unit 2. Didn't it say according to standard offer to purchase form 2T? Isn't that what you read in Unit 2 in practice? And so look at the bottom left. It's a realtor form. Realtor forms are for realtors. It keeps us on the same page. We get schooling on it, education, so that we know what's up. Now, if you don't mind just flipping over to 276. And you see number 2, fixtures and exclusions. Everyone is the same language. So when the person who sees the offer to purchase first is the buyer, isn't it? So when the buyer and their agent is filling in this form, here's what they expect to go with the property. The listing agent and the seller filled in the listing agreement, so these were on the same page, if you will. And so if a buyer's writing this offer with their agent, they're looking over this and they might say, I want that big antenna on top of the house taken off. Or I want that big satellite dish in the yard back there removed. So it's on their end now and they can exclude it. So it's the same language. Alrighty, go back with me now to Unit 2, if you will. And let's go to page, we were on 26. So at the bottom, trade fixtures. Trade fixtures. Now, when I see the word or hear the word trade, I think of business, do you? So in your trade, in your business. So this is a business fixture. It's commercial property, someone who is renting a commercial property. For example, I rent this space. That, projector? I don't even know, but I think it is a projector. Guys, that was put up for my business. When the lease is getting ready to expire, if I want to take it with me, I need to take it before the lease expires. because after the lease expires, I don't have a right to come back in this facility, right? And so even though it's attached, it's personal property of the renter because it's for the business. And once I leave, if I don't remove it, it becomes real estate. Does that make sense? So you want to make sure, they gave an example of a restaurant, I believe, and a pizza oven, and that sounds like, golly, that's really attached. They still have a right to take that with them, dismantle it, as long as it doesn't permanently damage the facility. Is it sort of making some sense, everybody? See, if it makes logical sense, don't overthink it. Let's just move on if it makes sense. But this fixture section is pretty involved. Look with me at the page 27. Agricultural fixtures, special class of fixtures. And it says similar, maybe it would seem like trade fixtures, but any agricultural fixture is going to be called a fixture. And even if somebody is renting, it becomes real estate. And so it says they could not remove it unless they have written agreement. Again, didn't we say everything is negotiable anyways? But if you go out to put a farm on the market and there's a renter there and they put in feeding troughs and certain things like that, the presumption is it's real estate. But I mentioned to you several times, we're not going to presume anything, we're going to ask, aren't we? And it would be put in writing if it's meant to go. The UCC, this is about personal property and or fixture. I bet you've heard of this, and maybe not this term, but I bet you've heard of this. I don't know about you, but these mailings must go out to people who have houses that are a little bit older, because when houses get a little age on them, they need to be updated, don't they? You know, like when your house gets to be 15 or 20 years old, you know, your kitchens and bathrooms, things become out of style, out of date. And we get in the mail a lot postcards from replacement window companies. And so houses, the windows built 20 years ago are not the same kind of windows that are out there now. And so we get these cards in the mail. Let us come give you an estimate on replacement windows. And by the way, we offer financing. That's about UCC. So if I said, come on out and give me an estimate on replacement windows, and they give me an estimate, and then I say, well, tell me about your financing, because windows are expensive. And they tell me about the financing, and I say, I think I like that. Guys, we're going to sign an agreement. It's called a security agreement, and that language is in your reading. It's a financial agreement. What that means is the windows, even though they're installed and they're attached, the windows are personal property to me, the owner, while I'm still paying on it. If I quit paying on it because they're personal property, because there's money owed, it means that the window company can come take them if I stop paying the bill, even though they were attached. Once it's been paid, it's real estate. Everyone, you'll learn to be tactful, and thank goodness the listing agreement has all these questions so you don't have to dream up, how am I going to ask this? Because it's all written out for you. But when you go out to look at a home and it's a little bit older, you're going to notice if the kitchen's been updated. You're going to notice if they've got replacement windows. You're going to look around and you should notice that. Now, in a delicate way, tactful, guys, you need to be tactful, but you are the expert and you do need to know these things. You're going to ask, do they owe any money? You have to ask, are there any outstanding debts that go with the property? And so if the kitchen's remodeled, the first thing that comes to my mind is, do you have a home equity line of credit? Because remodeling kitchens is expensive. If I see the replacement windows when I walk through the property, I'm going to ask, did you sign a financial agreement with the window company? We need to know that.
Is that true for everything? Like even if it would make your house, I guess like unlivable? Like, what if you got a roof replaced or something? And it was
If you
okay.
financed it, it falls under the UCC.
So they could still technically come back and take it?
If you don't, if you're paying on it,
Okay.
yeah, and you signed a financial agreement. It's all about the financing part that triggers this. So it wouldn't, windows is just an example.
Okay.
But there's another reason why we wouldn't want to know if the seller owes anything on it. Because everything a seller owes has to be paid for at closing. They can't sell that property and leave outstanding debt against the property. So we need to know whatever they owe, that they can afford to sell the property and pay everything off. We're going to learn about doing an estimated net to seller. If we sell your house for this, and you owe this, and you owe that, let's make sure that you can at least break even and hopefully walk away with some money, or how can we represent you? How can we represent you, seller, if we can't sell the house for enough to pay off everything you owe? Might not be able to represent you. So asking these questions would be important, and like I said, everything is pre-typed on the listing agreement, so you don't have to dream up how to ask.
So if you have like appliances that are not paid for.
If you have what?
If you have like appliances that are not paid for.
If appliances are movable, that's not personal property.
Okay.
It's real estate. All right, moving on along, page 28. Manufactured homes. Now, technically, manufactured versus modular. Technically, modular homes are manufactured. Mobile homes are manufactured, meaning they're built off-site, or the components are built off-site. For this reading, we're breaking it down. One of these is real estate, and one of these is personal property. So manufactured home in this reading says we're talking about a mobile home. And they use some terms in here they're old terms. They use the term house trailer. You know, people do live in mobile homes, everybody, all over the place. And in North Carolina, people live in mobile homes. Well, the whole key is mobile. If it's mobile, it's movable. If it's movable, it's personal property, isn't it? And so you would need to discern that. You need to walk around the property and see and ask questions, is this home still mobile? And, you know, lots of mobile homes, they've got underpinning, they've got something around the base that hides the wheels. But you're going to be looking and asking the questions, because if the wheels are still there, if the hitch is still there, it's not real estate, it's personal property. And if they own the land that this is owned, you will be listing for sale the land with personal property to remain. And if the personal property is going to transfer, then you would have to do a vehicle transfer ID from the Department of Vehicles. However, this mobile home could have been made real estate. It could have been made real property by taking off the wheels and the hitch and assembling it on a permanent foundation on land that is owned by the person who owns the mobile home, and then sending in the title to the vehicle to DMV and getting a certificate saying that this is real estate now. Okay? But you need to know and look around. Now, modular homes, I can remember way back in the day, because, you know, I've sold real estate a lot of years, I can remember hearing that word modular and prefab, and it had a very negative connotation. The connotation was cheap, you know, and that's not the connotation anymore. Guys, modulars are all over the place, and modulars can be very expensive homes. Think about resort areas, mountain homes, and maybe not so much at the beach, but probably there too. Even all around in residential, you see, or there'll be modular homes. Now, they're not like they used to be. You might not even know it by looking at it. In the olden days, you could walk into a house and could tell right away that it was a modular, because where the walls were attached, they called them the marriage walls. They were so thick, you could just feel like this is two mobile homes attached. Now, you probably won't even be able to tell. But you are to be alert and you might see a label in the cabinetry or somewhere in the panels, electrical panel, but you are to be alert, and if you don't know, you need to ask, because even though it's real estate, it needs to be disclosed. And the reason it would need to be disclosed, I don't think it would matter with financing, but it might, with a lender. Another reason is, what if you were selling a lot in a neighborhood that had restrictive covenants? There are restrictions in this neighborhood. Those restrictive covenants could have one that says, we don't want any modulars built on any of these lots. And what if you had a buyer who said to you, I've got a modular plan and I'm just looking for a lot? Well, don't you think you would need to know that so you could tell your buyer, if you buy that lot, you can't put what you want to there? You would need to know that. And so these are things that we'll learn how to find out as we go, because it would be something that would need to be disclosed. Why don't you write down this terminology? Because next week, hopefully, we'll be right on track with our reading. Next week, you're going to be reading and talking about Unit 7. And Unit 7 is major, we've already said, but why don't you write down material fact? Material fact. Is that a material fact? A material fact is something about the property that you should know or reasonably should know as a broker. It's something that would affect the property, something surrounding, something that maybe would even affect a buyer's decision on whether to buy, a seller's decision on whether to sell. Let me just give you a quick example. We're not going to stay on this topic. It's for later. If a road is coming through a neighborhood, don't you think a buyer would want to know that? It's a material fact. If tax rates are getting ready to go up, don't you think a buyer would want to know that? It's a material fact. Seller would want to know those things too, by the way, but that's an example. And so that UCC, material fact, everybody, there are things we're going to learn. And so this modular commission says it's a material fact. We need to know. All right, comments or questions? Let's take our break before we start the next unit. Now this next unit, everybody, I'm going to talk about the definitions. We're going to move along at a pretty good pace because it's level 1. And level 1, we know we need to know the terminology, but we don't have to overdo it. So why don't you take your break.